Derek and Abby, are you all ready to get started?
Yep.
Sure. Cool. So thanks for joining this LittleSis webinar on mapping university power and investments. We're so excited to be co-hosting this training with the College Climate Coalition, and we're excited to connect with you all and to share a little bit of our work tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you, Abby, to say a little bit about the College Climate Coalition for those who don't know about it.
Okay. Hi guys, my name is Abby, and just thank you so much for coming today. We're really excited to finally do this with LittleSis, which is an amazing organization. I'm an organizer with the College Climate Coalition. A lot of you here are already in that, but for those of you who don't know, we're a coalition of climate groups at colleges and universities around the world that are really dedicated to fighting for systemic change, the fight for climate justice, anti-oppression work, all that good stuff. So we really are working together to share resources, sharing knowledge, supporting each other's work, and holding meaningful coordinated actions to utilize our shared power as students that are invested in this fight. So we actually just ratified our organization, or we just released our organization's constitution and are in the process of ratifying it and want as many climate groups as possible to join. So I will be sending information in the chat with just our contact info, all of our social media, and then information about the constitution. If all of you guys want to get on board, that'd be great. So thank you so much. We're really excited for this. Thanks, Derek. I see you in the chat.
Cool. Derek, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe say a little bit about the webinar tonight?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. This is something that we've been talking about with people from the College Climate Coalition for a while. So just really glad that this is finally able to happen. My name is Derek Seidman. I am a research analyst with LittleSis. I focus mostly on the oil and gas industry, and we've been doing a lot of webinars this summer, with the situation with COVID and a lot of people, hunkered down. We've been doing a bunch of webinars around like how to research, fossil fuel finance and, especially like with endowments and everything. So we're really excited to do this with you all. Basically what we're going to be doing is sort of like an introduction to, what power research is, then some examples of like power mapping and where you start to look when you want to start to analyze and map out where power in your university or college is. And then towards the end, really get down into some of the like nitty gritty tricks of the trade in terms of how you actually research and find out, what is your college or university invested in. And sometimes, you can get really specific, like, finding out specific companies or specific funds that are invested in. And we'll look at some tricks for that, but also just to generally, how you can dig up dirt around your board of trustees and so on. So yeah.
Great. And I'll just introduce myself real quick. I'm Munira Lokanwala. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the community manager and a researcher at LittleSis. My role is to facilitate these kinds of power research trainings for activists and organizers. And so I'm really excited to be able to do this training with you all tonight. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are at LittleSis. So LittleSis is a research organization focused on government and corporate accountability. We conduct research on power relationships that shape policy in the US. We have a particular interest in the role that corporate money and power play in shaping policy in the US. We often work with organizers, activists, journalists to put research into action. LittleSis, our name, is meant to be the opposite of Big Brother. So we aim to train and inspire activists to do power research, to be able to dig up dirt, as Derek says, and to be able to map out the power structures that impact our communities and our lives, and to transform that research into campaigns and movements. We also oversee the LittleSis.org database, which is a wiki-style database and a platform for doing power research. The database profiles powerful people, like politicians and CEOs and other kinds of corporate executives, as well as corporations, that amass profit and power on the backs of working people. The data in LittleSis is drawn from a number of different sources, but much of the data is user-generated. So you can sign up for an account, which is free to do and very easy to do, and begin to add profiles for individuals and organizations, and begin to sort of generate data that can then also be shared with others and other people can use, and also edit. So the database is the work of, over a decade of collaboration and research by activists, journalists, and academics who, are using this information to map out power networks, and they're also using other tools like LittleSis's power mapping network visualization tool, Olographer, which you'll see a little bit later in this training. So, great. So what is power research? So I've used this phrase a couple of times, and for those who might be unfamiliar with the concept, power research is investigative research that's focused on power structures. So it often follows the money and connects the dots between key players in any given power structure. So we could talk about the fossil fuel power structure, or the private prison power structure, or on and on. That the idea is that different industries and have power structures that we need to understand if we're going to take them on. And so power research allows us and gives us the tools and ways to think about doing this research that can help us take on these big, massive power structures that we're up against. And it's a kind of research that's typically practiced by activists and researchers and journalists, who are interested in mapping, analyzing, and challenging systems of power. Next slide, please. So power research asks questions like who benefits, who wins, who governs, who has a reputation for power. So it focuses on various business, political, and personal relationships that exist among the elite that allow them to maintain their power. Power research is also known as opposition research, muckraking, or strategic research. And in asking these questions, we begin to sort of, the first step of power research, which is to sort of trust that sometimes we intuitively have a sense of who holds power in our communities or in our institutions and organizations. So it can be a starting place for doing power research, is to ask questions like, who always wins when they're want something, and who is always profiting or benefiting when something happens, and who's like who maintains power and governance despite opposition. So these are some questions that can get us started in thinking like power researchers. So there's many reasons to do power research, especially if you're an activist or organizer. It can help shape some of the strategy and how you decide which targets to choose in your campaigns. It can also help you really identify and understand what you're up against, which could help you build a well-informed strategy and plan for your campaign, and also help you be able to anticipate obstacles that you might face. It can also help you find creative targets that you might have otherwise overlooked or not have not been on your radar. And it can also help you to be able to find ways to connect your campaign with maybe broader movement campaigns that are happening, whether they be on other campuses or in other cities. Power research can help you sort of find connections that might not be immediately apparent. So we're going to talk actually about a couple of examples of that. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so someone asked if the slides will be available. Yes, what we usually do is put them into a PDF and keep all the hyperlinks in and share them. So we'll get these to people. I will send them to Abby, and Abby can send them that signed up. So just sort of building off what Manira said, was talking about with power research and how, power mapping can really help you begin to understand relationships and networks of power and influence and strategize and find leverage around them. I want to just give you one example because this is stuff that's, I think, really relevant to you all in particular as college students that are organizing. So this is a map of someone on our staff made of that centers around weapons that were being used against protesters in Ferguson, Palestine, a whole host of places by a couple companies, Combined Systems, Safariland, and you see them here. And it sort of maps out through a power map on the LittleSis oleographer, which again, if you want to learn how to use this, it's really easy to use, and we have a lot of instructional materials. And Manira is the person to talk to because she does a lot of tutorials on this stuff. And that's a sort of side point. You see that Combined Systems, Safariland, these are their owners: Carlyle Group, KKR, private equity funds. And here's another one: Warren Kanders. Some of you, especially if you're in New York City, you may have heard of this. Warren Kanders owns Safariland. He's also on the board, or was, hint, hint, of the Whitney Museum of American Art. And, in protesting this violence and these weapons and this sort of profiteering off of suppressing, protests for freedom across the world, you might think, oh, maybe we should just go to Safariland's headquarters and march in front of it. But Warren Kanders probably wouldn't really care, and you probably wouldn't get that much media attention. But so this is what organizers did. They used, knowing that Warren Kanders had a prominent position on the board of the Whitney, one of the most prominent art museums in New York City. Organizers would decolonize this place, and others led protests at the Whitney Museum. They got artists involved, and they would just crash the museum and say, get Warren Kanders off your board. And it just gained huge amounts of media attention. And eventually Warren Kanders resigned from the board. And it wasn't just about, getting him to resign for the board. It was really about also kind of raising the issue of that surrounds his the weapons company that he owns. And it was sort of a piece of the puzzle in a bigger struggle that's going on. But that's just one example about how mapping out the networks of something like a fossil fuel company or a private prison company, looking at who owns them, who are the board of directors, what museum boards do they belong to, what who do they donate money to, et cetera, et cetera. How you can start to sort of paint a bigger map of like where they might be vulnerable. And one quick point to make too. This might be of interest to you all that power research like this is not something that's new. It's something that's been part of our movements for decades. So for example, some of you may have heard of the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This was the student group that was really sort of at the front lines of trying to dismantle Jim Crow in the U.S. South in the 60s. And they had actually their own in-house research department. They called it the SNCC Research Department, where they did this type of power research and put out reports, for instance, on how, the White Citizens Council in Mississippi, the overt white supremacist groups and the Klan, how those interlapped with like the ownership of the big utilities and big factories and so on. So, it gave them a sense of the power structure and who to target. They put out things that connected Northern financing, from big banks in the North to Southern Jim Crow. And this was helping them in understanding the power structure as they tried to dismantle Jim Crow white supremacy in the South. And there's other examples of this too, for instance, from the Vietnam War. So in doing this, there's a long tradition of student activism, of movement organizing, that to look back on and to take inspiration from. A tradition that helps us strategize, through power mapping on how we can, have stronger strategy and tactics in our campaigns.
So when you begin to do power research, it's good to have a kind of checklist of the kinds of information that it would be helpful to know about a person or a corporation that you're interested in targeting or interested in knowing more about. So this is a kind of web that illustrates some of the information that we at LittleSis use to begin to look at when we're researching a powerful person. And so, some of the things on this list, perhaps the first thing you would start with are work positions. So what kinds of, what is their, where do they work? What's their position? Other boards, other corporations that they might be connected to via board membership, advisory positions. Often powerful people are, invited to be advisors for different corporate boards, but then also for different trade organizations or university schools as well, we see, and then directorships. So any positions where, they might have a decision-making role are important to know about. Next you might want to look at political donations. So who do they give money to? Who are the politicians or the PACs that they support? And nonprofit positions are also really important, as Derek mentioned. Knowing the kinds of cultural institutions that they hold positions in. Chambers of commerce are often places where you'll find powerful people having positions. Industry associations, think tanks are places to look into. And then philanthropy, really wealthy people will have personal foundations. So if you're looking at like the CEO of, a major fossil fuel corporation, are they someone with a kind of wealth where they have a personal foundation? And if they do, like who sits on the board of their foundation, and who do they give grant money to? And potentially who are they major donors to charities in the area? These are things that would be useful to know, as well as things like memberships. You can sometimes find out, if they belong to different social clubs or country clubs, or just generally where they hang out. These are things that you can find via Googling and other ways. And then, large membership organizations also, like, do they belong to the NRA or, family and friends are also, and colleagues and mentors are important to know about. Where they went to school is also can be really helpful or useful information to have, especially if they're still active as an alumni, or if they give money to the school. Maybe they have buildings named after them on different university campuses. These things can be important to know strategically. And then, of course, if they hold trustee positions there, that's also important to know. And then finally, things like investments, like which you can do research on and find out, if they are major shareholders in the companies where they work, or potentially in other companies as well. These are things you can look into. And then next slide. So similarly for corporations, you're gonna, ask questions, or you're gonna wanna know, who are who are the leadership and staff at a corporation or an organization. In this case, in the colleges and universities that we're researching, who are, what are the schools invested in? Are there, so in if you're researching companies, you might want to know about like different PACs that those corporations have formed, any philanthropy that they do. You can also research, what kind of lobbying they do. So, what kind of legislation are they for or against, and are trying to push on, whether it be like a local level or a federal level. What kind of subsidies do they receive from the government? So oftentimes major corporations, are receiving large amounts of money to do business, and knowing that information can be really helpful. Also knowing, again, different trade organizations that they're involved in. And then, of course, shareholders have been knowing who some of their prominent shareholders are, or just knowing who, the different kind of bodies of shareholders at a corporation can be really useful in, organizing, whether it be shareholder resolutions or other kinds of things, can add significant sort of information for our campaigns. Is there anything you would add there, Derek?
No, I think this is, I mean, I think you're probably getting the idea. Again, we'll make these things available for you. So, that you'll have these charts as like something that you can start with if you want to map out powerful people and corporations. You're basically just in a way, the following the money, right? All these things in some ways following the money and the networks and the influence and building that out. So we're done with the first part now of like this just sort of basic intro into power research. We're gonna sort of transition more into some of the nitty gritty stuff about actually starting to really look at university power and how to do that. I just see what is a creditor? Creditor is just basically working in finance, loaning, making credit available, making money available. It's different ways it can happen, but it could be a bank, or it could be, it's usually a bank. But one question I have for everybody, I'll take like 10, 15 seconds. Type in, please. When you think about where university power lies, what is one place that you think of? Regents, board of trustees, board of trustees, money. Yes. Donors, definitely big one. Donors and trustees are often overlapping too, right? Alumni, yes. Oh, this is awesome, everyone. Okay. You're awesome. You're amazing. Okay. So everything everybody's saying really rings true. I think, yeah, the administration and different parts of the administration, especially like the sort of what we might think of as like the executive administration, like the real higher echelons. Alumni have power. That's something you all are surely already thinking about. How do you mobilize that alumni power? Students have power, right? I mean, but when we're thinking about the power structure of a university, yeah, I think usually the first place you go is the board of trustees, or whatever equivalent name that might have, right? Because that's really the governing body of the institution, as well as like the chancellor or president or what have you. I think you're all thinking along really strategic lines, which is great. I'm going to talk a little bit about the board of trustees, and then we'll move on to we're going to do some look at some boards of trustees and look at some power maps and talk a little bit about how you can explore boards of trustees a little bit. But basically a board of trustees is the governing body of an institution. It oversees like all the sort of big picture stuff of a college. What's the mission? What direction's the college going in? Approving a budget, the basic policies of the college. So the board of trustees, ultimately it hires and fires, the president of the college. So that's really where ultimately power lies. Maybe not the day-to-day decision-making, but like the ultimate power. And if you look at a board of trustees for most universities and colleges, you'll find that, funny enough, it's not like, made up of students and professors and so on. It's mostly made up of people from banks and asset managers and real estate companies and lawyers, sometimes lobbyists, corporate power figures. A general rule of thumb is if you live in a city and you want to understand who rules your city, go look at the board of trustees of one of the big colleges in your cities. and that'll give you a hint of like the relationships of power of where you live. Trustees, of course, are also a big fundraising arm. They donate a lot of money, they raise a lot of money. Often they get brought onto the board because of that. So, the board of trustees is really a good place to go at in terms of like if you want to know where power lies. Though I would also say that on a day-to-day level, yeah, it's true. The administration, the chancellors, the provosts, and so on, those are also powerful people that you want to sort of almost equally think about, because they are often the ones making decisions, but their bosses are the boards of trustees. There's other things too, like advisory boards, and there's often public-private foundations that like manage an endowment or fundraise. But these are some of the big ones. So one question I have for you, let me open this chat real quick, is do you know of any powerful people on your school's board of trustees? David Rubenstein, whoa, he is a powerful person. We might mention, he's one of the most powerful people in America. We might come back to him. David Rubenstein is the head of one of the heads of one of the most powerful private equity firms in the country, and he's on all kinds of powerful boards. And cool. So you all are identifying some people from powerful companies and powerful networks. Well, one thing I do is advise you to, maybe as a first step, maybe you're already on top of this, but to make a spreadsheet to start to map out your board of trustees. This is completely made up what I have here, but this is a way you might want to go about it, right? Like make a spreadsheet like with categories: trustee, board, their position on the board, their corporate ties, the sectors they represent, other corporate boards they might belong to, their philanthropic ties, other ties to the university. I won't go over all of these things, but I'll just make one example, right? Trustee A, they're the chair of the board. Their corporate ties, they're tied to KKR. Maybe they're the co-founder. That's finance, a hedge fund. They're also on the board of Bank of America. They're also on the board of the Met, the big museum. And they gave a $20 million donation to have a building named after them, right? This is made up here, but if you look at your board of trustees, you'll find stuff that is pretty much just like this. And once you start to do that, you can start to get a real sense of the power network that your university is embedded in. I'll give you some examples, okay? So we're just going to go through a few small maps that we had put together to sort of illustrate some of this. Now I know before we get to looking at KKR and Henry Kravis, this is the Claremont McKenna Board of Trustees. Fairly small liberal arts school. Look who's on the Board of Trustees. Here we go. I don't know if you can see my cursor now. We got Goldman Sachs. We got J.P. Morgan, Jones Day, one of the biggest law firms that's filled up Donald Trump's administration. Henry Crown and Company, Reed and Davis, again, big law firm. Google, Tribune Publishing Company, the media. You could go on and on. Powerful people. And of course, Henry Kravis of KKR. Now, why are we talking about KKR? Well, I know that, College Climate Coalition had, some people I've talked to have been thinking about KKR because KKR is now one of the big financiers of the Coastal GasLink pipeline that is being, resisted by the Wet'suwet'en people, and that this is like a big issue now that people in the climate justice movement are rallying around. So here we see Henry Kravis, one of probably the most powerful person at KKR. He's on the board of trustees of Claremont McKenna College. He gave them a huge donation. He has a leadership institute named after him, and he's tied to KKR. This taking stuff that's out of the LittleSis database, I'm going to add a few other things here, right? Columbia Business School, because we know, for instance, that he's on the. He gave $100 million donation to the Columbia Business School. He has an MBA from the Columbia Business School, and he's the co-chair of the board of overseers of the Columbia Business School. Now, if we add Coastal GasLink pipeline, just to add that to the map too, you can start to put together a map just by looking at the boards of trustees of a few schools, researching KKR, researching Henry Kravis. Most of this you could just do through Google, right? You can start to get a map that connects, the Coastal GasLink pipeline and its ownership to the boards of trustees of money flows of different colleges that I'm sure you have, or I know that you have activists and members involved in, right? So that's just one example of a power map, and I'll go to this next one. I think Manira is going to take over, talk about one or two of them here.
Sure, yeah. So that was really great. I think you got a wow, Derek, in doing that live power mapping just there. But, similarly, looking at this power map of Amy Gutman, who's the president of University of Pennsylvania, and sort of looking at not just her role as president of the university, but then also looking at a few of the trustees on the board. What we're seeing is, a power map can reveal like multiple ties to fossil fuel financiers like Vanguard Group, which is a huge private equity firm that, is heavily invested in fossil fuels. And we see that, Gutman sits on the board of that firm. And then we see other members of the UPenn Board of Trustees who have positions at Blackstone and TPG, two other major private equity firms that invest in energy and in the fossil fuel sector. So, just a small kind of map of just a few of the people on, UPenn's Board of Trustees and in their leadership shows a pretty tight-knit sort of network of people who, have significant sort of decision-making power within some of these organizations that finance fossil fuels. Derek, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, sorry, I was sort of just playing around because I wanted to show people that you can also make these very cool maps with the LittleSis holographer tool. So yeah, this one was one that we made that just sort of shows Amy Gutman's ties, and the Vanguard Group tie is really important because Vanguard is the top shareholder of fossil fuel companies, publicly traded fossil fuel companies in the world, and the president of Penn, who talks, who had sort of positions herself as a climate activist, has a position on the top governing body of the biggest owner of publicly traded fossil fuel companies in the world. So, if you're thinking strategically and you're an organizer, that's something at a school like Penn, that's something interesting to think about. And just going back to, some of these other ones that Manira mentioned, these are people on the board. Like, this was honestly just, we just picked two random people, and they both ended up being involved in, finance, private equity. Blackstone's one of the biggest private equity owners of fossil fuel companies in the world. And this guy, Ken Moelis, has this company, Moelis and Company. And you just go to their board, you go to their company, they advise on financial transactions, and you go to energy and infrastructure power. And you just see that he heads this company that's all over the world, like advising and profiting from, dirty fossil fuel deals, right? In the US and abroad. So, this is all the stuff that is, as soon as you start really digging into your board and not just thinking about, what fossil fuel companies, but also, the finance behind the fossil fuel companies, the private equity firms and so on, who we'll talk more about in a second, you can really start to paint a map. So this is another map. We'll just do two more and then we'll move on to like how you actually do some of the research. So this is something I was looking at Harvard University's 990 form, and you'll learn later on in the hour what a 990 form is. Two big donors to Harvard are this guy, Steven Schwartzman, who he's the head of that private equity firm, Blackstone, that I just talked about. and Leon D. Black, who's the head of the second biggest private equity firm in the world, Apollo. Both of them are billionaires that are big donors to Harvard. Both of them have various things either named after them or positions on, boards at Harvard. I've mapped some of these out here. We won't go into the details because it'll take too much time, but you get the picture. They're giving money to Harvard. They're getting positions of influence within Harvard. And if you look at the private equity funds that Harvard's invested in, and don't worry if you don't know what private equity funds are. We're going to get to that later. Harvard's invested in funds that they manage, right? Their firms manage. So, they're giving money to Harvard. They're profiting from Harvard's investing in their own funds. And, if you dig into it and do some research, this took me a while, you find out that some of these funds that bundle up money that Harvard has that invests in different companies are or have invested in different fossil fuel companies in the past. And it takes a little research and time to figure some of this out. But again, this is some stuff that you can start to piece together. But we'll come back to this in a second. But this stuff's important, trying to tease out, the sort of the kind of, to use a word that I hesitate to use because Trump used it, but like the swamp that some of these relationships embody, right? The money that's going back and forth, and it revolves around donor relationships and buildings being named after somebody, and where money goes in a university and so on. And so we'll go to one last map to sort of, one other way to think about this stuff. So I think you were going to do this one, Manira?
Sure. Yeah. So we can do it together. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit about like how doing this kind of power mapping of university trustees and higher ups can help us begin to see like a handful of some of these financial firms that emerge as like key players in a university's power structure or in the power structure of, specific handful of elite universities. And, like Derek said, these, private equity financiers and people in the finance industry end up on boards of universities, small and large. And so there was a question in the chat about like, how does one become a board member for a university? And the question is that there's, no, it doesn't require any background in education to become a board member at a college or university. Really, we're seeing more and more this kind of emergence of people with backgrounds in finance and, huge corporate CEOs taking up these positions on boards. And so, one of the things that this allows is it opens up an opportunity for cross-campus organizing, that can help build a larger case against these banks. And we see different, an example here of different colleges and universities citing JP Morgan Chase's role in the climate crisis. And it becomes a crisis for these banks and these institutions that, when these campaigns kind of move beyond like local colleges and universities and become these kind of like national calls to hold these, banks accountable for the roles that they play. And so, power research can help us to sort of distill and find these targets that have a much broader, that might resonate with a much larger audience, and a lot more people might be ready to kind of put up a fight against.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that, Manira, is that if people go to littlesis.org and you search, just do a search that says university trustees, you'll see different lists, entities, but look at the different types of network maps that people have made. You can start to, LittleSis is crowdsourced, and we have a whole community of people that makes maps to share. And these are, useful research tools. Here's Bank of America university ties. I haven't looked at a lot of these, but that's an interesting one. Some of these were made a while ago. This one was made in 2014, but you can update them. Let's see, University of Pittsburgh Board of Trustees. Whoa, that one looks like it could be a monster on a horror film or something. But you get the idea, right? So, you could Williams College Board of Trustees, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you go look at some of these, you can get an idea of the types of things that, ideas. And, it's useful to just think around and play around with, because you all, especially as a national organization tied to other groups like Divest Ed and so on, you have a lot of potential to like link up with, bigger movements that are going on around corporate targets that are almost certainly tied to your universities in some way. I think the last thing before we get into the research stuff is that, just to sort of spell it out, when we're looking at these boards of trustees, we're looking, you want to keep an eye out. You're mapping them out, and you want to get a sense of just make transparent what the power structure of the university looks like. But you're also kind of keeping an eye open for things that could give you a little leverage as organizers, right? So is there a conflict of interest? Is there, for example, someone on a board of trustees who is helping to set, governance for the university, who the university is also investing in? So like, maybe their firm is profiting from the university while they have a governing role at the university, right? There's a conflict or a tension there, for example. Or maybe there's someone who says they're a big climate advocate, but they're on the board of directors as well of a fossil fuel company. Here's an example of that to the right here. The chancellor of the whole State University of New York system was, fashioning herself as a big climate advocate while she was sitting on the board of a coal company and she was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year as a board member of this coal company that was dumping toxic coal ash in Puerto Rico. And anyway, she got called out about it, had to resign from the board, and brought the struggle that Puerto Ricans have around this company more into the public eye. So you're looking for instances of conflicts of interest, of hypocrisy like that, generally ties to sketchy stuff. It doesn't have to be climate stuff; it can be anything, right? So you want to have a sort of strategic eye of like, where do you see tension? Where do you see places you could sort of dig into and maybe potentially make demands around, right? Like, why are you saying this but doing this? Why are you associating the university of this when we say that the university believes this, and so on, right? And through mapping this stuff out, you can start to think about that. So what we're going to do now, and I know we're at 8:45. I'm guessing this will probably take around 20 minutes, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A. I think we said we could have go up to as late as 9:30 if people want to. So we're just going to look at a few different tools you can use to investigate your university and different parts of this power that we're talking about. Okay, I won't spell these out. We'll see them as we go along. So the first thing is that you of course want to use Google. I'd say 80% of things you can just find through using Google, but it is important to sort of know certain tricks for using Google. Obviously, you know how to use quotation marks and everything, but putting quotation marks around specific phrases will isolate those specific phrases, and that's really useful. And I think also you'll get a sense after this webinar was done of like words that you can include in searches that you might have not thought of before, like private equity or investment portfolio or what have you, right? To turn up certain types of searches. One thing that's really important that is to use search operators. These are things that you put in front of a URL that will turn up only a specific type of document. So I'm going to give you one example of that, right? Actually, I'm going to do that a little further down the line. But basically what it means is like if you put, site like that, and actually I'm going to do it right here. I just remembered now. But before I do it, let me say one more thing. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. A really good way to dig up info on university investments is to look at the business press in magazines, things like Bloomberg, Institutional Investors, Barron's, Pensions and Investments. These are like journals that are like specialized in things like covering news about endowments or covering news about investment funds and things like that. So this right here is a site search that I'm going to do. So site, www.pionline.com. That's pensions and investments. And I'm just going to do two search terms, University of Michigan and investments. And I'm going to show you what it does. So basically, This is the search that I did. It's just in Google, but I put it in the URL. So you put that in the URL, and what it does is it turns up only pages on this site that have these search terms: University of Michigan and investments. And if you click on any of these, I'm doing it incognito, so you can open, I think you get a limit, and so you can open new ones if you keep doing it incognito. It has just the different funds that University of Michigan has announced that it's investing in. So if you know the names of those funds, you can do research on those funds and find out, what are they invested in? Are they invested in private prisons? Are they invested in oil and gas? So that's a really important trick. Just to, real quick, you can also do it like, file type PDF, and just do like www.princeton.edu, right? And that'll only turn up PDFs that are on the Princeton University website. You could add a search term to it, but this is useful because a lot of times university portfolios or annual reports, things that you might want to look for, are in PDFs, right? So that stuff like this just helps you, narrow down the searches and find the stuff that you're looking for, right? Using the right combinations of search operators and the search terms. I would also advise you signing up for Google Alerts if you haven't. You can just, put in search terms that you want to Google, and anytime something new comes up in Google News around those search terms, it'll deliver it to your inbox. Just go to Google Alerts. Search Google Alerts. An example of like how this has been useful before is that search that I just did brings up articles of the University of Michigan announcing of its investments in this fund called Lime Rock Partners 4AF. And on the surface, it just looks like, oh, it's just some money fund that University of Michigan and Michigan State invest in, right? But if you actually start to do some research, Googling that specific fund, like in quotation marks, you find out there's a Bloomberg article that says, oh, this is the fund that's actually almost all it does is pretty much fund a business called Crown Rock. And if you research what Crown Rock is, you find out it's the 30th biggest oil driller in Texas. And it's run by this guy, Timothy Dunn, who is a billionaire who bankrolls the most powerful far-right organization in Texas that is trying to pass things like, an anti-transgender bathroom bill, curtail voting rights, things like that. So we put out, this is something that we researched and just came across, and we contacted the Climate Action Movement at University of Michigan with it. We wrote an article about it, and they were able to use this really effectively, right? Like why, University of Michigan, not only are you investing in fossil fuels, but you're doing it through these shady, Wall Street instruments that end up bankrolling these far-right billionaires that are, supporting causes that we're supposed to stand against, right? And through power mapping and through doing this type of research, you're able to sort of flesh this stuff out. And they were able to use it really effectively to pressure their university around their fossil fuel investments. And so again, that's just an example. So the next thing I want to move to is, I'm not paying too much close attention to the questions right now because I'm trying to move through this. But Munira, maybe if there's any questions that I should answer, you can just shout out if you're looking at it. This is another important database, the SEC Edgar database. The SEC is the Security and Exchange Commission. It's basically a government regulatory institute that regulates publicly traded companies. Those are companies that people can own stock in. So, a lot of big companies aren't privately owned, they're publicly owned, because by issuing stock, they can get a lot more money when people buy the stock, right? And if you want to research, a lot of universities that own stock, I'm not actually sure what the criteria is for what universities do and don't, or when they do and don't have to, put this into the database, but or file something. But if you go to go to the database, company file searches, you could look up something like ExxonMobil, and their filings would come up. But let's do Yale University. Okay. Now, what this brings you to is these are all their most recent filings where they talk about their public stock holdings. We're going to click on this information table. So these are holdings that Yale filed with the SEC that it has, right? Now we're just gonna, a lot of these are holdings in companies like Zoom, JBG, which is a big developer for Amazon's real estate in its new DC, Virginia headquarters. These are funds that, Vanguard, who we mentioned before, and BlackRock, big asset managers, oversee. What these are basically, funds that you can buy into, and those funds own shares of like 1,000 different companies. And so if you want to buy into them, because if like 10 companies fall, collapse, your risk will be spread around, and so your fund won't go down too much. But let's look at like this one, iShares, T-Core, whatever it is. Let's Google that. So this is a fund that's managed by a big investment firm called BlackRock. Its ticker symbol is ITOT. Let's go back to this. There's this cool website called Fossil Free Funds, where you can enter, with these mutual funds or these ETF funds. Again, those funds that are just like, that a lot of retirement funds and colleges invest in, like a lot of different companies. You put the name of the fund, ITOT, there it is. And this shows you all the different, fossil fuel companies that fund is invested in. So that fund, that we were just looking at that Yale's invested in, it gets a C grade from this Fossil Free Funds site. And it'll give you a list of like, the top companies that it's invested in, right? ExxonMobil, Chevron, and so on. So even though, they're invested in these sort of funds that don't have like the names of the companies on the outside, you can do research to find out who those companies, what they're actually invested in through these funds. We can't get into it too much, but because we don't have enough time, but a lot of the different filings that you have in the different SEC filings, they're called things like 10Ks, Def 14As, and it sounds like really, obscure and difficult, but what they actually just are reports where companies have to report certain things. A 10K is just basically every year a company has to, give a detailed report of its business. Def 14A, that's a really important one. That's one where that has the boards of directors of companies, how much CEOs make, who the top owners of the companies are, and a lot of powerful people at universities belong to boards of directors of companies, including the president. So I'm just going to give you one example here. Okay, that's Lee Bollinger, the president of Columbia. One second. Zoom is doing that thing where every time I try to click on something at the bottom, it flashes something up, so I can't do it. So I'm just trying to figure it out. Oh, here we go. Graham Holdings. So Lee Bollinger, head of Columbia, he sits on the board of Graham Holdings, and what that is a holding company and owns a lot of things, including Kaplan. Have any of you heard of Kaplan? Maybe you have, because you took those tests when you were getting into college. So he heads up a university that and profits from sitting on the board of a company that oversees these testing materials to get into universities, right? Funny enough. So this is the Def 14A, the proxy statement of that company that he's on. And if we just look up Lee Bollinger, you'll see his bio and the board of directors. And you go down here, you see how much money he makes. He gets paid $150,000 each year just for being on that board of directors. That's not all that much as far as corporate board of directors go, but it's something that he probably isn't advertising, right? Now I want to show you one other thing, okay? In these Def 14s A's, you can also see who are the top owners of the companies, right? And maybe it was up here, but you can see how much the CEOs make. These are the top owners of the company. We mentioned Vanguard Group before, right? That Amy Gutman is on the board of. Vanguard is a 9% shareholder of this, right? Of this company. So, you start to look into this stuff and you can see how all these things are tied together. And I know this is a lot of info and it's a lot to take in, but, it's the type, this is sort of, trying to sort of introduce you to some of this stuff. And we're definitely happy to keep stay in touch and help, but give you a sort of a head start maybe on researching this stuff. If you don't want to go to the SEC, you can always just go to the Google investor relations page of a certain company, because all publicly traded companies have these investor relations pages where they have a lot of these documents. Now, real quick, a good thing to always find out is to try to see who's donating to who, right? So if you want to look at state and local donations, you'd have to Google that, because every state has its own particular database. But if you want to look at federal donations, there's one place you go, and that's the Federal Election Commission database. So what I'm going to do here is just put in the name of that guy, Steven Schwartzman, we mentioned before, who's a billionaire, the head of the most powerful private equity firm in the world, who's tied to Harvard and Yale and other companies. And we're going to look at his donations, let's say from 2015 to 2020, okay? And I'm gonna just do this so that we have the biggest donations first. And you can see, he gives tens of millions of dollars to, these are all Republican congressional funds. He gives a lot of money to Donald Trump, who he's also friends with, and so on and so on. And if you go down far enough, you'll also see that, he's given some money to Democrats too, because a lot of these powerful figures play both sides, right? So one other thing I want to show you too is that, if you're curious, you can also do something like go to employer and put, I don't know, I'm just thinking of a Harvard University, right? And it'll list, anyone who's you have to file who your employer is. Anyone, it can sometimes take a second, sorry. Anyone who puts that as their employer, it'll show all their donations. It might be taking a while because there might be a lot of donations, but come on, FEC, you can do it.
There's a question in the chat while this is loading about if there's an equivalent database for Canada, both an equivalent SEC database as well as campaign finance.
There is something called SEDAR, SEDAR. I haven't explored it too much, but that would be the equivalent of like an FEC, or sorry, an SEC. I'm not so sure about the FEC, and actually someone asked me about that, and I am trying to get more information about that. So if you send me an email afterwards, I can get back to you on that. But yeah, anyways, so you see, these are Harvard University employees, and big donations over the past 5 years. So anyways, I'm sure you all have a lot of fun with this. You can see who your professors donate to, right? Not that you should be a watchdog. Not that I'm advertising you, stalk and monitor your professors' donations, but it's all public information. So, anyways, so we're getting to the end of this part here. Just need a few more minutes. This is the really important thing, though. So Form 990s are super important. These are tax forms that universities that are nonprofits have to file, and what they do is they basically have information about the board of trustees, how much revenue a university is getting, who it's giving grants to, who it's paying out contracts to. And even more important, the 990T talks about unrelated business income. So if universities are investing in private equity funds or other funds that they're getting income from, and they have to report a lot of that in these 990 forms. So I'll just give you we'll look at one example, okay? I'm going to look at Mount Holyoke College. I should say these are hit or miss. Some universities don't report a lot of information or much at all that's useful. Some report more. It sometimes depends on how transparent a university decides to be, because they don't need to report everything necessarily. But trustees of Mount Holyoke College, okay? Now, let's look, this is the most recently available 990 form. Now, if you go through this, it'll tell you all types of information. This is all the finances of the college, their total assets, revenue, what they spent, et cetera, et cetera. Different boxes they're checking that you can go through and look at for information. These are their biggest independent contractors, so you can see who the university is giving money to contract. It's sometimes interesting to see if people on the board of trustees are tied to entities that are getting money from the university. That happens sometimes, and that's a conflict of interest. All this small print is sometimes interesting to read because it can report about conflicts of interest. These are the boards of trustees. You also get information about like how much the president and other top leaders make. So this is the president-elect of Mount Holyoke, who two years ago was making that much money in benefits. So the information that you can find in these 990s. And I'm going to stop there because we have more things to get through, but you can explore that and find more info. The 990T is the thing that probably is really of interest to you all that are trying to sort of follow the university money. So these 990Ts, again, sometimes they just don't have a lot of information, but sometimes, and often they do. And if you scroll down here, if you get to the end of these 990Ts, sometimes they list the funds that the college is investing in. So here we go, jackpot. These are different private equity funds, and I'll explain what private equity is in 1 second, but I just had to get to this first. Different private equity funds that Mount Holyoke is invested in. Some of these, just invest mostly in real estate or pharmaceuticals or things like that, but a lot of them also invest, for instance, in oil and gas. NCAP Energy Fund 10, NCAP Energy, Flat Rock Midstream. If you Google these funds, the ones that have all these energy names in them, you'll find that they're natural gas partners, et cetera, that these are funds that invest primarily in oil and gas and sometimes coal companies. So basically the money that's being invested in these funds is going back to these oil and gas companies, and then the university is hoping that these oil and gas companies are going to return money back to the private equity fund that will be returned back to them, right? That's how it works. I saw someone from here on University of Pittsburgh. If you go to the University of Pittsburgh's 990T, not their most recent one, but the one before that, you'll see that they're investing in a lot of these oil and gas funds. Sometimes universities will just say partnership 1, partnership 2, and they won't say the names of the funds because I guess technically they don't need to, but a lot of times they want to be transparent with that maybe people who they want that information to be transparent for, I guess. But real quick primer, like what is private equity? Because I keep talking about private equity. The biggest source of university investment is private equity. It's not public stocks. It's not, bonds and things like that. It's not even like, direct real estate holdings. It's private equity. Private equity is basically the most powerful actor on Wall Street. Private equity firms, they form these funds that pension funds and universities and really rich people invest in. And these funds can sometimes be billions of dollars. And then these private equity firms take these funds and they invest them in companies, often private companies. And they often invest them very aggressively. They'll try to find, for instance, an oil company that's really needs money and can't get money from a bank. And they'll go and invest in that oil company. And they'll take over the board of directors of that oil company. And they'll load the oil company up with debt. And they'll say, they'll take a lot of money from that oil company and return it back to its investors. So Private equity funds, often the biggest ones oversee hundreds of billions of dollars. So, all of these things that we're looking at are private equity funds. This is sort of how it works, right? Um, a company, a private equity firm like Blackstone or Carlyle or ones that we've mentioned, they oversee these funds. Universities invest in the funds. The funds invest in different fossil fuel companies or whatever companies. It doesn't have to be fossil fuels. And then, then the money is supposed to go back towards, the investors, right? The universities and others. We don't have enough time to go through this. I was going to give you more examples. This will be in the PowerPoint when you all have it. But, another example is just Carleton College. If you go to its 990T, it's invested in a lot of different oil and gas funds. One's called Natural Gas Partners. If you Google Natural Gas Partners and you go to its website, you'll see, and the links are here, the private, it has all the different portfolio companies, so all the different oil and gas companies that it's invested in. You can do research and find out that actually it's partnered with Carlyle Group, one of the big private equity firms that we mentioned that David Rubenstein, who someone mentioned, heads up. So actually, Natural Gas Partners is really owned by Carlyle Group. And this is something that you'd find out if you started Googling Natural Gas Partners. So, these are different ways that you can start to, once you identify what one of these funds is, you can start to identify what they're invested in. So here's an example, right? If I just Googled the name of a fund and plus About Us, so Natural Gas Partners Resources 11 and About Us, that's one of the funds we came across, right? And you'll start to see that news stories about the different companies that specific fund is invested in. So if you can identify through looking at those 990s what funds your university is invested in, you can start to Google, with sort of these specific search terms and play around with those, or look at some of these other things that I link to here. You guys can explore those. I'll link to them. Some of them are subscription, but you can usually get those subscriptions through your business schools. They might have them already. So just, email your librarian to see if you have these databases. You can really start to pinpoint and map out through private equity what your university is invested in. This is the sort of last research slide we have. Manira, I know you were going to do this. Should I just go over it real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
At the end here. So the last two things I'll point you all to are that every university has a financial office. It has an office of investment. And you can Google that. So for example, Smith College Office of Finance, right? So if you Google your university investment office, Office of Finance, something like this will come up. And any of these will have more or less information, depending on the university. So here's Smith College. You go to the bottom of this, it has their financial reports. Click on the most recent one. All universities should have something like this that you can look into. And you just go through it, and it has a ton of information on the university finances, how much money they're bringing in, what they're investing in, the different areas that they're invested in, private equity versus real estate, things like that. And we don't have enough time to go over it, but if you looked at it, you'd find all that information. So this is especially useful if you're arguing with the university about they're saying, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that because of money reasons. You can start to develop your own analysis of the university's finances. Also, sorry, my 4-year-old son just came in here, so he might be joining me. So another thing also is that if you look at the portfolios, if you Google portfolios of colleges, you can sometimes find what those portfolios are invested in. So this is me just Googling Michigan State Michigan State portfolio investments, right? And Michigan State actually, because it's a public university, probably publishes its private equity investments. So try doing that first things first with your university to get a sense of what they're investing in, because that information might be available. The last thing here is the Department of Education maintains a database. It's called the iPads database that has tons of information on university investments. And I linked to it there, but if you go to it and you click on this link here that says look up an institution, you can, put in your university. Let's put Clark University. I think that's a university, right? Yeah, Clark University, of course. You click on it, and it has a ton of information that the university has reported to the Department of Education on, sort of how many students have financial aid, right? What's the tuition? What's the enrollment price? Hold on, Mateo, can you go downstairs? Tell mommy I said you could have some candy, okay? That always works with 4-year-olds. So if you go click on finance, it'll have like the amount of money that, the university, its core revenues, how much it's getting from tuition and fees, how much it's getting on return of investment, how much it's getting from private gifts and grants, and so on, things like that, right? Tremendously useful information if you're trying to, develop your own analysis of things. And, if you go to this tab that says data feedback reports, again, it has just like a lot of information on university finances, right? So you go and other university information, how much money they're spending on the library, average salaries, how much, percent of the distribution of the core revenue, what are they spending money on, right? So, you can start to put together your own, picture of all this. So, sorry, this ended up being a little fast-winded at the end. There's a lot of tools and information we wanted to convey to you, but this is recorded, and there is. We'll also have this here. It's we'll link to a webinar that you can look to if you want to learn how to research, real estate holdings that your university has. Every city and county has a real estate database, so you just have to Google it, look up your university, and you can find out what what properties the university owns too. And there's more tricks that you can learn around that through watching this webinar that we did on researching property ownership. So yeah, I guess we can end it with this. Munir, did you want to just close it out with talking about this last slide a little?
Sure. Yeah, we just wanted to include some resources. I know that, again, the slides are going to get shared out and they're going to have all these links. And I'm sure that people have lots of questions, both about where to start and what kind of resources are available for doing divestment organizing. So we just wanted to include a few of those: the Fossil Free Toolkit, which is a campus guide to fossil fuel divestment, another one that was put together by 350.org, and then database of resources from Divest Ed. And then the last one is a report that the Harvard Prison Divestment Campaign put out that talks about how they went about identifying public holdings at Harvard for their campaign. And so it's a really great report to sort of understand, the way that power research can help kind of build these campaigns and get them off the ground. I know that we have some questions, so I actually want to go ahead and open up the floor for those. I know that, for instance, there was just a question about one of the earlier slides. So if the person who asked that question wants to take themselves off mute, they can feel free to ask the question directly to Derek. But then just some broader questions are like, how do you get to be on the board of trustees? Do you have to be alumni, or is it based on how much money you donate? Also, how does one research the ties which the members have to various organizations? Is it just Googling their names? How can you, and then also, how can you tell if the information is up to date?
Yeah, so in terms of like, how does one get to be on a board of trustees? You might know something about this too, Manira, but like my sense, I think that like basically the board of trustees invites new trustees, like they rotate on and off. And I'm sure the leadership of the university is involved too. Um, that's my sense of how that happens. It might be slightly different with like big public university, like regents. Um, but I think that's usually how it works. It's sort of like, you know, just sort of the board is cycling in new members. And in terms of, I don't think you need to be an alum. I think often they are, but I don't think you need to be. In terms of how you do the research on the different ties, um, you know, I think a lot of first of all, search anyone, a person or an entity on the LittleSis database first things first, because a lot of that information is on the LittleSis database. But yeah, just, you know, I think you can do it with a lot of Googling, a lot of the tools we showed here. Usually if it's a prominent person, they'll have a biography or multiple biographies online with their company or with boards they belong to, and those will have a lot of information. You can Google their names with things like quote board of trustees or quote board of directors, and that might bring up stuff. So you just kind of have to play around and sort of, you know, put together search terms that include categories that you're learning, that categories which are related to positions powerful people occupy. The question about keeping info up to date, there's no easy answer for that. You know, you just have to try to find the most up-to-date info as possible. The way that I usually deal with that is that if you go onto a website and something's there, you can pretty much assume it's up to date. Like if you know, Chevron says, you know, person A is on their board of directors, assume that's true, I guess, because that's credible. But you can always just say something like as of, you know, and then put the date of the source, you know, the most recent source that you found. You know, as of December 2019, XYZ was, you know, a trustee at wherever, right? So you can hedge a little bit if you need to.
Cool. There's also a question about like mapping out dining services or dining system, like, yeah, dining services at colleges and universities. Do you have any tips about where you might start with that?
Yeah. So usually dining, you know, dining facilities, the workforce, I mean, I guess it varies school by school, but a lot of times the dining facilities workers are not employed by the school. They're subcontracted, and there's a few big subcontracting companies that do a lot of this at universities all over the country. So you can find that stuff out with just some Googling. I don't know offhand what the big companies are. I know I've read about them and heard about them before, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Yeah, but there's a few big.
Is one of them. Yeah, there's a handful of them, which I can actually Google real quick and share. But often they are run by big corporate food service companies.
Yeah, and one thing about them also, I know that a lot of them are open. You should look at who their investors are, because they might be owned by private equity firms, or I know some of these are owned by private equity firms. So, but yeah, Aramark, that's the one. That's one that was on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, Aramark.
Cool. Then there's also a question, so like once you find which private equity or hedge fund your university uses to invest, how can you figure out what those private equity and hedge funds are invested in, which I think you got into a bit, but maybe you can say a little bit more about like some methods that you could use to uncover that.
Okay, so so just to be clear, the question was, if you identify the private equity fund, what are methods you can use to find out what companies those funds are invested in?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the Googling here, the examples of Googling is like inserting the name of the fund with quotation marks with terms like about us, operations, terms that these private equity funds often use. That's one thing. Another way, this is actually the easiest way to do it, okay? But the problem is that you need a subscription. The good news is that a lot of universities have subscriptions to PitchBook because they have business schools, and business schools need these subscriptions. And um, I'm going to log into what we use. And I would also say that, since you're a national network, if you find, people that have subscriptions at their universities, if you don't at your university, you might be able to find a way to connect through CCC to a member who does and work with them to do the search. But PitchBook, basically, it's a database of funds, right? So this is NGP. If you did just search NGP, natural gas partners, right? This is one of the funds we were looking at. So if you go into here, funds, all funds, and these are some names of the funds, right? So let's go natural gas partners 10, right? This I'm not sure if this is the funds still operate. These funds, I should say, operate for about 10 years, and then they close out and they don't operate anymore. So, you want to also make sure that the fund is still active. They'll open up the money for the fund, people invest in it, it'll invest for 10 years, and then it'll liquidate. So I know this is getting a little into the weeds, but I just wanted sort of just mention it. So, so these are, if you go to limited partners, these are all the different, retirement funds, universities, and so on that are invested in this fund, right? It's not comprehensive. Like, they're just calling this information, like regional university, they're just calling this information from public information. But they put it all in one place, which is useful. They're University of Texas, et cetera. There could be other investors that aren't on here, so you should just know that. But it's a lot of information here. In fund investments, right? So these are the different companies that it's invested in. Or if this fund is closed, it's not invested in them anymore. Anyways, this is just an example of how these are all oil and gas companies. So you have access to PitchBook and you identify these funds. It's easy to do this research, but again, you need a subscription. Sometimes, if you use ProPublica text search, you can find stuff. It's not super comprehensive. ProPublica is where that same place I was searching for 990s. But if you put the name of a private equity firm, the name of a fund, let's just put natural gas partners again. I'm not sure what will turn up here, so we're taking a chance, right? So these are different foundations, basically. A couple universities are coming up. Auburn University is invested in natural gas partners. This would just take you to the 990 that shows their investments. But this isn't super comprehensive, right? If you want something that's a little more comprehensive, there's this thing called Citizen Audit. It's a database. Again, this is something that you need to have a paid subscription for. However, you can do a few searches for free. Another thing is that, again, your university could possibly have a subscription, because this is a research tool that people would need, that researchers would need at a university. So you can see if they have it. If not, you can ask them to purchase it, talk to your librarian. And it's also something that potentially, like, your network could purchase if it has funds, because it's like a couple $100 for the whole year. But I'll do that again. Okay, the tax documents, Form 990s. Actually, let me do a better one that I know is there's actually a lot. Lime Rock Partners. This is a private equity firm that has private equity funds, and this is the one tied to the University of Michigan that I mentioned a while back. You search Lime Rock Partners in here, you'll see that a whole host of universities are invested in Lime Rock Partners funds. This means they're invested in funds that invest in fossil fuels, because that's what this private equity fund does. You see a lot of colleges here, so you just click on those. Some of these may be more recent than others. Well, actually, this isn't going to take you there, but what this would tell you is that you know where to look. You know how to go into that ProPublica database and look up Rochester Institution of Technology and look at its 990s, okay? So yeah, it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. One thing I wanted to do really quick was, what was the name again, Manira, of one of the big companies that someone mentioned of the dining facilities?
It was Airmark.
Yeah, so if you go to Aramark Investor Relations, this will be, it's a publicly traded company. This will be the same type of stuff that would be in that SEC database. And let's see here. Okay, here we go. Annual reports. This is that Def 14, or actually SEC filings. I just want to show you an example in practice, just right off the bat. Let's look at proxy filings. So this is their Def 14, their most recent Def 14, okay? Of that big dining facilities company. So this would take you to who's on the board of directors and how much they make. It would take you to how much the CEO makes, right? Top beneficial owners, these are the top owners of the company, right? Again, Vanguard, right? How much the CEO makes. Fine, it's going to take me too long to do it right off the bat, but CEO to pay ratio, CEO to worker pay ratio, that would be in there too. Anyways, just wanted to like make that point that like, just thinking of something right off the bat, that's how you would do it. See if it's a publicly traded company. And how do I know that Lime Rock is invested in fossil fuels? Just because that's just something I knew. Yeah, you could find that out through Googling, but I did it. I found that out just through these research techniques that sort of we're talking about here.
So we're actually at 9:30, and I don't think there's any more questions in the chat, but also want to invite you all to get in contact with Derek and I if you have any other questions. There was some conversation in the chat about maybe doing some longer sessions on some of these databases. I know we moved through everything really quickly tonight, and hopefully some of you all are like raring to go on your campus organizing, and we'd be happy to support that in whatever ways we can. Derek, do you want to just put that first slide up where that has our email addresses? I think Abby's also going to be sending a follow-up email with a recording as well as the slides, and our contact info will be there too. But we're really excited to have this chance to connect with you all, and are super inspired by all the strategizing that was happening in the chat during this webinar. So thanks so much for sticking with us. Derek, anything you want to say as we close out?
No, just thank you. And yeah, please get in touch if you have further questions. It would be a pleasure to try to do more of the deeper dives into some of this stuff down the line. And yeah, just keep digging. If you map out your board of trustees and you see the different companies people are tied to, keep digging around them, keep digging around the companies. Google them with things like scandal or whatever. I mean, you can find out a lot of you can really find out a lot of information that can be useful if you're tenacious as researchers.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Good night.